snappy cold mid-morning from Viewpoint, program personalities, politicians, and perspectives. It's a little warmer here in the studios at WLCN, high on the hill of County Road 2250. We're close there, too. Our guest this morning, Mr. Bill and Mr. William Donuth. I'm going to have him formally introduced in a couple of seconds here. Bill, as you remember having been with us before, and we appreciate your coming today, we always try to start with a kudo or two. And this being the red kettle season, it seems appropriate, Judith K., that we might offer a snap of our hats and a good salute to the folks who stand out in the cold, particularly today being reminding of that.
Of the fact that it's cold.
Ringing those bells and trying to get a little money. And so as you pass by these volunteers, our Salvation Army workers, stop. Do more than saying hello to them. Drop a couple of bucks in the bucket.
Right.
Or maybe a little more if you can do that.
And you may rest assured that it will be used well.
Exactly. One thing you don't have to worry about Salvation Army is wasteful overhead.
Right.
So let's remember those folks as you walk by them. So let's get right down to serious business, Mrs. Busby, and introduce. Well, he's gave us quite a list of accomplishments here. So
well, yeah, my word, I'm impressed.
We're going to have to pay him more.
Well, we'll put him on the 150 list. Bill Donuth is very active with the Historical and Genealogical Society. And I was telling him before we went on the air that in my mind, I kind of toy with that idea because I think it would be fun to find out. But it could be a surprise to you, too. You just don't know what you're going to find out when you start looking at great-grandparents, do you?
Well, we do run across things that people would rather not have known publicly. We find that stuff, we put it in a file, and if the family finds it, fine. If they don't,
that's
then it's
just as well,
too. So,
right.
We don't advertise it. We don't put it out there for other people to see. So it's only for the family.
Judith, I'd like to first get down to the Logan County Genealogical Society because that's kind of a little quiet, perhaps sleepy operation there. Not everybody knows how much good they do for us here in the county. So Bill, just take us to the formation of the Genealogical Society and give us an overview of what they do there.
The mission of the society is to find, and collect, and preserve the history of Logan County. Mm-hmm. That includes every life that had any part of it in the county. Mm-hmm. So whatever happened in the county that was recorded somewhere, newspapers, the public records, whatever, we try to bring into our society so people can see that stuff and find it. Or if we know where it is, like the county clerk's office or the circuit clerk's office, we refer them to those offices since we can't duplicate all those records and get them into our place because we don't have the room for that, but we have a lot of information. Well, the county history books, family histories have been donated, so we've got a lot of stuff about Logan County available to researchers. You
mentioned just before we went on the air that Walter Spotts was my neighbor, and they were friends of ours. Mm-hmm. And Lincoln Sand and Gravel left you their papers. Yes. Now, I'm sure that would be an interesting thing, too. I wouldn't have thought about an entity, a business, going into this.
Well, we've had, the records from Lincoln Sand and Gravel we have, and their books start like 1905.
Oh, yeah.
And go up to whenever they went out of business in the late 70s, early 80s, I guess, was, I think, the newest date that I've seen. But we've also had the Lincoln Hill Free Methodist Church leave us all their records when they closed their establishment.
That would be interesting.
And there's all the baptismal records and the confirmation records and things of that sort. The things people like to find to fill in family histories. So And we've had several other collections like that. And we were talking about the shoe collection just before we went on, which is 800 copies of the Lincoln Herald from 1873 to 1895,
Treasure
plus
trove.
a lot of print jobs that the Lincoln Herald did. I've got a lot of 1896 presidential election year stuff for McKinley, and Tanner was his first vice president, and a lot of ballots from that period of time and political posters, and it was just fascinating. But it's the Republican side, because the Lincoln Herald was established as a Republican paper, a Republican mouthpiece they called it back then.
Is that right?
Yeah. So
What kind of editorials they be producing today with what's going on? Billy, you're steeped in history and so knowledgeable of how to go about researching history. What piqued your interest in this field, so to speak?
What I look for, the big books about this stuff, Civil War has been done by the people who know how to do it. But I wanted to know what happened in Logan County and how these people responded and what the war did to impact their lives. So that was what I was looking for that book. Then I did a book on the Civil War dead, so I researched, that was about the time the statue came down and we put the new statue up. And then World War I finished last or 2 years ago. What was happening in the county when that was going on. And I'm just finishing up follow-up to that, which is the Spanish flu. And that book should be out early in the year.
Spanish flu, did you say?
Spanish flu.
Yeah, that was an epidemic.
It kind of coincided with the end of World War I, and then went on into 1920. And we had in the county several hundred deaths from the flu.
Really?
Yes. So I tried to identify those folks, and that's what I've got to do yet, is go rule out some at the county clerk's office. I'll be looking at death records on these people and see if they actually died of the flu or not. So all the articles from the newspapers of the time. So in this last book, I've got the Middletown Ledger, the Atlanta Argus, and the Lincoln papers, Lincoln Courier Herald, and the Lincoln Star. Read all of those for 1918 to 1920, through 1920, and picked out the articles about people who were ill or.
Once you get into this, what I'm trying to say, Judas, is I was volunteering down there and filing away obituaries, and I got so doggone interested in I never got my job done. I was busy reading these obituaries of names that I knew of or knew about,
very easily,
and I just got engrossed into that, and it was fascinating reading.
Oh, it would be so easy to do that, though.
Yes.
And the name, of course, would be a name that would be carried on today yet, and you think, oh my gosh, that'd be my friend Harry's great-grandfather.
Yes. Well, just Friday, I was given a scrapbook from World War II that somebody in the county had kept, and over the weekend, I photographed it to make a digital copy of it, because you know what old scrapbooks look like nowadays. They just fall apart. So I photographed it, and I will be cropping out each of the articles on each of the people in there and putting them in a file for that person. And that's what I did with World War I. That's what I did with Civil War. So and the Civil War dead. And so all of those things will perpetuate. They'll be somewhere.
Billy, were you a good student of history when you were in school?
I didn't particularly care for it.
Yeah, that was dry. It was dry
Yes.
to me. And then I had
What made you decide that it wasn't so dry?
Well, genealogy. I started into the genealogy, and I was looking for articles on my great-grandfather, John Frederick Boy, who settled in Postville. and was one of the officers for the town of Postville, and was involved in the merger in 1865 of Postville and Lincoln. And then I was looking for articles on him, and I was finding none. But then I started finding these letters during the Civil War period from the soldiers that were printed in the paper. And I said, "Oh, I got to keep that. I got to keep that." Oh. And so that's where the first book came from.
How fun!
The editor of the Lincoln Herald was Henry Sturgis. He had 32 letters in those papers that I got and put into that book. So his work from that period of time is preserved. Fascinating guy. He eventually joined the 4th Cavalry, Illinois 4th Cavalry, with Tom Larison. Oh, wait a minute. No, he was the 2nd Cavalry with Dr. Can't think of his name right now, Mount Pulaski. But he went all over to the South, became captain of a black regiment in Mississippi, and was in the Tupelo area, after the war, getting the rest, what do they call that, restoration done. But that was fascinating. And then you get to know these guys, and you follow up on them. Where'd they go after the war? When did they die? And you just get fascinated with them, and you follow them.
They become a new friend.
Yes, exactly.
648-5510. If you want to know anything about history in Logan County, we have Mr. History himself, Mr. Bill Donath, been associated with the Genealogical Society for some time. In fact, was co-president a couple of years there in 2007, 2009. Became president in 10 for 5 years there. He also knows how to handle the money. He's a treasurer. And by the way, mentioning that such mundane matters as money, if anybody is not sure what they would like to do with the couple extra bucks they have, it wouldn't be a bad idea to drop by the Genealogical Society. They're right across the depot there on what would be North Chicago Street. I think Broadway separates north and south. And they'd be happy to see you with $5 or maybe $25. So
anytime. That's what keeps us alive.
Yeah.
Now, during the Civil War, this was pretty close. This area was pretty close to the Mason-Dixon, a lot closer than Minneapolis was. So did you, as you researched that era, find a lot of where a family would be involved in maybe both sides?
Not from around here. I never did come across any reference to it at any time. But in Logan County, about half the people came from the north, which would be the abolitionist states, and about half came from the south. So there was a lot of conflict over the issues, especially slavery.
Sure.
And there were black families living in Logan County at the time, and you get both sides from the white folks. Some of the southern whites wanted to drive them out of Logan County. The northern whites protected them. And I thought that was fascinating that actually went on here in Logan County.
I bet you get, in the course of a week, I bet you get a lot of oh my goshes that you run across, huh?
Yeah, and like the new scrapbook. There's just a lot of information in there that I probably won't be able to find anywhere else. And it came from an individual.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned our black associates in those earlier days. Two things happened to me. Number one, I grew up with some very, very smart parents, and I was taught the difference in how to be courteous and never say a denigrating word about our black community.
Same here.
And the second thing that happened is that we had a really solid black community here in this community. Really great people. So I have no real direct knowledge of problems that but they were plenty. And I'm sure we had them right here in Logan County, but I was never aware of that. Happily, I had parents that kept my head above water in those matters. Anybody that has parents that look after them can indeed say they're very lucky today, particularly in these times. Billy, we were mentioning before going on air this program on TV, Finding Your Roots, Henry Louis Gates Jr. I find that really very fascinating to me. As a genealogist and a historian, how do you look at that program?
I find it fascinating. They're kind of focusing on the celebrity people.
Yes.
Which is really good. That one, I can't think of her name right now. That one actress was a Spanish lady, and she found out that her people were in the West in the 1600s. Before it was even part of the United States, the Spanish had already been in that territory, and then found out that she was related to some kind of royalty in Spain. So that, to me, was fascinating that they could find that stuff. With it probably being in a Spanish archive somewhere rather than in an English archive.
Well, I was fortunate in college to have a professor of history, Annalie Bailoff, who had the ability to make history come alive. I became, at that time, interested in history. In high school and grade school, pretty dry stuff and boring. But when you have somebody who has the passion for it and the knowledge and the ability to impart that knowledge in an interesting way, that makes history entirely different. History is dry reading, but there's some fascinating things that happened.
Yes. And I like collecting that stuff for the county.
One of your ongoing projects is Roots and Branches, editor. I like that title.
Roots and Branches is our quarterly, and I collect stories for that. I'm working on the next issue, which comes out on December 31st, January 1st, is our winter quarterly for 2020. And I find a interesting newspaper article on either Abe Lincoln. There's an article in this issue on a interview of a guy who was on the train, the funeral train.
Oh, really?
And his story of how that transpired and what took place. So that story is going to be in this issue because February is Abraham Lincoln month as far as I'm concerned. And then we have other stories, might be the Atlanta Fair committees,
which is a big deal,
and listed all the people who were on the committees for the Atlanta Fair.
And so many people here would find a great uncle or somebody in those things. How fun. And being not exactly a metropolitan area, you must know a lot of these people, and you run across a name and think, by golly, I'll bet that's John's uncle.
You're right.
Well, of course, the subject this morning is history. And Judith Kay and William, in order to make sure that this station is not history, we have to acknowledge some sponsors so we can pay our way here. So go right ahead, Mr. Ash, if you're ready at the console. Right back live to the studios here at WLCN. Program is Viewpoint. Our guest this morning, Mr. William Donath, major mover and shaker in the Logan County Genealogical Society. Besides a lot of other fine volunteers, he's not the only one. I think we should mention that we have a number of fine volunteers down there. Put a lot of time in, and without them,
I'm not the only one there.
It isn't going to work. So, and by the way, if better than spending the afternoon at the bar somewhere, you go in there and sit down quietly and just go through some of the reading material they have. It'll fascinate you. Logan County has really some remarkable characters in its background, and some movers and shakers, and got things done. And that's why we're where we are today, because of those folks who had the vision, the foresight way back in those old days. In your file here, your resume, Billy, you talked about a vertical file. Tell us what a vertical file is, sir.
The vertical file is a bunch of file cabinets. When I started working with the Society in 2003, they had one 4-drawer file cabinet that had a lot of loose paper in it, unorganized.
Just
To
stuffed in
me,
there.
anytime you have a pile of paper that's unorganized, you have nothing.
Well, you got a pile of paper. Curious.
Yes, that's it. So I went through that and sorted it all out to the different families and topics and whatever it was about, and got them into file folders. And that's grown from that one 4-drawer file cabinet to about 13 4- and 5-drawer file cabinets now. So we have a lot of stuff in there. So when somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I want to research the Gossett family," I'll go back there and I'll pull out the folder on the Gossett family, and anything that we've had come in or we found loose sheets and it's not in another collection, we throw it in this file. It's in the file, it's unorganized, but people can sit and go through it and figure out what's there. It's gotten to be one of our go-to collections that we've got, because people just love going there and pulling out the one file instead of sitting there and going through hundreds of sheets of paper. They might be down to a dozen or a score of papers. So it's been something that's been ongoing, and in the 16 years since I started it, it's just grown, and about everything that we come through gets into that file some way or another.
You know, bless your heart, you have to have the patience of Job, don't you?
Being patient is a good quality.
Yes. It's a virtue for which we must all strive. I haven't striven hard enough, I'm afraid.
And another thing is, if we get a book in that's not indexed, it's a book. You have to go through every page and find out what the name is. So I take on that role too, of indexing those things that are not yet indexed. So like our, let's say, roots and branches we just talked about. All of them were there in the Society, but there was no way to find out what had already been printed and whose names were mentioned and all that sort of stuff. So I digitized all those, got them on the computer, and then set up a spreadsheet and put the names in and let the machine put them in alphabetical order, and now we have a complete index for that. And I've done that with several collections.
With the computer, it's certainly been a boon.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
To
I would hate to be
genealogy.
doing this longhand.
Oh, my word. It'd just be impossible.
Yeah.
God's
Life
patient with us, but He's not that patient. He's not going to let us do all that.
No.
I note, and I had forgotten, we have kind of a noted author in our presence, Judith Kay.
Yes.
Bill has published the following: Logan County History of Illinois During the Civil War. That was in 2006. He published that. Then he was a sequel to that in 2009. And then he talks about the Statute Committee, the Civil War Memorial, interior of the courthouse, the interpretive signs. Abraham Lincoln on the courthouse lawn, an interpretive sign, 2015. He's responsible for getting that work done. Logan County during the Great War. The Great War, I don't want to step on the toes of my fellow World War II veterans, but the Great War was known as the 1917-1919. That was the Great War.
It had not yet been surpassed. So that's why they called it the Great War.
That was a war to end all wars, and that didn't happen, unfortunately.
None of them do.
You
no,
know,
because we get more stupid people right along. Just go ahead and declare a new war.
and today they're still continuing to prove that politicians are stupid. So, I don't know how in the world you found time to do anything else, Bill. You have some helpers there and some associates at the Genealogical Society office there. By the way, is it safe to say we get people in there almost on a daily basis?
I think it's safe to say that. We're shifting over. We get a lot of email now. And people are not traveling like they used to. So they can email us and we can do the research, and then they can send us the money, and then we send them what we find.
So they can sit in their own home and have a coffee or a beer as they choose,
right.
And get the information they're seeking from you.
That's right.
Well, that's another service,
yes.
so to speak, and it's a never-ending service.
Right. We keep busy.
That means
we certainly do, and there are 4 of us actually that do that kind of research. Bill Detmers from Normal, he's an Indian boy. Gary Freese from Lincoln, and then Jane Zimmer is also. She's good. She was doing that kind of work in Springfield at the archives down there when she was working down there on her breaks. She would go over and do things for folks. So we're glad to have her. She's a valuable asset. All 3 of those people are. Because I often get ones that I can't find anything on, and I'll just forward it to all of them, and I'll say, "Help! Give me some help. I can't
they
find
do.
this." But, oh yes, they always come up with something.
One book that you have completed is Generosity, Logan County During the Great War, 1917 to 1919. What are some of the examples of the county's generosity?
Well, the volunteerism, for one. People stepped up to take care of the Red Cross work. This Red Cross was a great deal more involved in that war than most. And then the bond sales. They had a group of guys called the 4 Minute Men who would talk between the reels at the theater. When they were changing reels out on the movies, they would go up and talk about buying bonds and things of that sort, and they would be assigned or volunteer to different nights to do that. Then in the bond sale, Logan County was the highest bond sales per person type of rate in a 51 county area.
Oh my.
That included Northern Illinois, which included Cook County, and they were awarded a German cannon to put on the courthouse lawn, and it was there after the war, came in 1919 sometime. Then it was moved over to Latham Park, and then it disappeared, and somebody finally told us, well, I saw that thing in the metal recycle in World War II to make munitions and guns to send back to Germany. So that left us. But I did find pictures the other day in a newspaper where they were unloading those cannons to be shipped to the different towns. So I thought that was kind of cool. Fit right in with that story.
There must be a million of those kind of stories out there that we've just never run across as regular people.
That's right. As the generations pass, a lot gets lost.
Each of us at our own individual families have episodes or incidents of some individual part of the family who did something unusual, maybe even above the law, who knows. But we all have family members back there who stood out for one reason or another.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to find out about them.
Yeah, I know in my family, one of my great-grandfathers was married 3 times, and my great-grandmother was the 3rd, and the first 2 ended in divorce, and there was 1 child born into the 2nd marriage, I believe it was, and then I traced her down in Indiana, because that's where they moved after they after they left Lincoln. And then that great-grandfather only lived to be 49. He was a heavy drinker, abused his wives. So those were the kinds of stories we were just talking about.
Well, he didn't live very long, but he lived awful hard, didn't
Yes,
he?
he did. Yes, he did.
Well, that's interesting. As I said before we went on air, just in casual conversation here, my father never knew his dad.
Mm-hmm.
My grandmother, Victorian soul that she was, kind of took umbrage with the fact that my grandfather had a family at the other end of the railroad. She booted his tail out, and so my grandfather never knew his son at all. And later found that, apropos of just what you said, we found that he was married 3 times. So we've got some cousins running around that we don't know anything about. That's history. That's
history.
Every
That's
day.
Family history.
Now, do you have people come in from out of town a lot to use your services that you make available?
Yes,
people searching your family
keep
history?
track of where people come from. We have a sign-in sheet. They come in the door, they sign in and put down their hometown and what they're there for, to do research or whatever. And then I take those sign-in sheets and put them on a spreadsheet and keep track of where they're from, and then I use that when I'm, like going to the city council or the county board or to ask for funding. I'll have that handy so I can tell them how many people have come in and where they're from. And that's, remember the old tourism board, they wanted heads and beds. That was how they counted how valuable you were to the tourism industry in Logan County. And then we have that, if they're from Arizona, they're not in for just a day. So it's, and we've had foreign countries. I think we've had 41 different states, plus Illinois, and probably 15, 16 foreign countries. We had a couple in last year researching the state school.
That's interesting.
And she was from Canada, and he was from big town in India. But he was British, but he was living there and working there. And it was really neat to sit with them, and that's another thing. When the state closed that, they didn't give us all of their records because a lot of those are closed on the residents, but they gave us furniture. We've got some nice furniture from the state school, and the developmental center, I guess was his last name, wasn't it? And and a lot of scrapbooks with articles about the state school.
Oh, I'm sure that there must have been a wealth of information out there, because that was in operation for years.
1875 to 2002, was it? Something like that.
And lots of people lived there from all over.
Oh, yeah,
I note
thousands,
that you and Billy Detmers worked on Logan County Cemetery information.
Yes. Yeah.
That had to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
Because we have a lot. I don't think our listeners, by the way, 648-5510. We have a Logan County historian here. If you want to know what happened to Uncle Bull, call Billy Donut. He'll tell you. You may not like what he tells you, but he's going to tell you. I don't think everybody realizes that we have a number of small, what I'll call private cemeteries scattered around our county. But there may only be a half dozen or maybe 10 or 12 graves there.
Yeah, we have the Logan County Cemetery District takes care of 42, I believe, 42 cemeteries. Many
In
of them
Logan County?
Abandoned, yeah. And there are a lot of cemeteries that we don't supervise because the local people want to take care of them themselves. So each township has the option of opting out of the district and taking care of their own cemeteries.
Were people at one time, or are they today, allowed to inter the loved one wherever they want?
I don't know what those restrictions are specifically. I sit on that board as well.
I don't think you can just pick up Grandpa Og and bury him on the south 40 of the farm. I don't.
You have to have a permit nowadays and all that. There's a lot of legal issues involved in
There'd
that.
almost have to be, or if somebody is interested in genealogy a generation or two from now, how do they know he's under the oak tree? The oak tree probably isn't even there.
That and you have a lot of cremations now where people aren't buried.
Yes.
And you have a lot of that going on, as well as lost cemeteries. And even the cemeteries that are there, the records are lost. Because those cemeteries normally were either a family cemetery or a church cemetery. And if the church burned with the records, those records are gone. But a lot of those are like that. But a lot of people have gone around and they walk those cemeteries and they read those headstones and they transcribe the headstones and they make a book on that. And we've got a book on every cemetery at the center. From people who have done that sort of work over the years.
Well, and that's not so easy to do, because as the years go by, the material that's in some of those stones
They get
really decays.
the marble ones are the worst.
Yeah, they don't last that long.
And we learned that with the Civil War statue too. It was marble.
I don't think we have a headstone in any of our cemeteries that says, "I told you I was sick." That's an old joke about headstone markings and so forth.
Yeah.
Or WFEC Field said, "On the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia." Now, how do you and Bill worked on the cemetery and the history of where did you start?
Well, the cemetery district has an office at Zion Cemetery, north of town, and all their records are there. So we went out, and several people helped Bill with this. Photographed the books in which all of this stuff is written, and then Bill took it and divided it up amongst several people, and we all took part of it and put it on a spreadsheet, and then he took it all and put it all in one big spreadsheet. So there's probably 30,000, 40,000, maybe even more burials that we have record of in Logan County. Biggest cemetery obviously is Old Union, and it's got maybe 10 or 11,000 in it by itself. So it's busy.
Yes.
Have you found one thing, Mr. Donath, in your work with the genealogists? Do you recall any one particular historical incident that really stood out and got your attention?
Well, mostly the wars and the diseases, because we've had other plagues besides Spanish flu. We've had cholera in the 1870s, and nearly a whole family was wiped out over near Middletown with cholera. So those things come and they go, and the things people had and died of back then, we don't even bat an eye at nowadays, because they're treatable and they can be dealt with pretty easily, but back then they were quite deadly.
The flu being an example, this Spanish flu must have been just an awful thing. And today, we in this country at any rate, don't lose people to that degree at all from the flu. Maybe your neighbor will get it, or the kid that sits beside you in school, but it doesn't travel the way it did.
Yeah, the folks who can take the flu shots need to. That helps dampen that spread so that it doesn't go nearly as far. The flu shot is, I guess, the medical field's best guess is what's going to come around next. And sometimes they get it right, and sometimes they don't. So.
Well, the childbirth was another thing. Many women died in childbirth.
Oh, yes. Yep.
And now that's just virtually unheard of now.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting you brought that up, because one of the things I found in the Spanish flu book, which will be coming out probably in January, I had 18 new mothers. Either they had the flu when they started delivery, or they got it soon after. Found 18 of them, 14 of them died. And they figured this out nationally as well, and they were trying to figure out just what was happening with these young mothers that it would take them so quickly, and it was just a couple of days. The most notable of those was Bill Maxwell's mother.
Oh.
She delivered a child on like the 1st of January of 1919, and she was dead on the 3rd.
Wow.
So.
That was quick.
Oh, yes.
William, from a research standpoint, during the Second War, we had a kind of a notable incident here where a young pilot got his wings, Mark Holland by name, and he had worked for Charles Stringer, a noted photographer, as a high school kid. And so he let Charlie Stringer know he was going to come through Lincoln, quote.
Mm-hmm.
And Charlie Stringer set his camera up on a tripod on the corner there, what we called Mark Cucci's corner on the courthouse square. That was the name of a business.
You're dating yourself.
Yeah, well, I am. Anyway, Mark proceeded to set his C-47, which was a twin-engine airplane, prominent in D-Day because it dropped tons and tons of soldiers and weapons on D-Day. Anyway, he proceeded to come through town right down Broadway and had his plane tilted. And Charlie Stringer took these pictures.
I saw those pictures. They're cool.
Yeah, they were amazing, weren't they?
Yeah.
He was close enough you could see the guy sitting in there.
Mm-hmm.
How would you research that? If somebody heard, I heard the guy that flew a plane down Broadway. How do I find out about this? Some walk through your front door.
We have some binders up there that are titled "Know Your Lincoln," the city of Lincoln, not Abe this time, but all that kind of stuff is in those binders, so that interesting stuff like that.
I was overseas at the time my mother wrote me about it, and she said the kids scattered under their desk at school.
I imagine it was pretty loud.
Oh my, it had to be really loud, because he was below the courthouse dome.
Yeah, he was pretty low.
Twin-engine airplane running down.
Oofta. Mr. Donath, I dare say you're a fortunate man. I bet you never say, well, I guess I'll go to work. I bet you say, well, I guess I'll go to work. Don't you?
It's been quite interesting.
I should
We
think.
appreciate, my goodness, I looked up at the clock just now. We've run out of time already. We appreciate, Bill, sharing your talent and your time with us. We appreciate particularly sharing your talent, your time, and what you do down at the genealogical place as opposed to being right here with us this morning. So on behalf of all the citizens, we want to extend a thanks to you on their behalf. We'll close the program, and I always try to find something to say that's hopefully worthwhile, and I've come across one that I kind of like that says simply, be the reason somebody smiled today. Thank you for Viewpoint.